He hadn't planned to come home for Christmas. The deployment schedule had been tight, permissions delayed, and expectations lowered to protect himself from disappointment. That's why he didn't call, didn't text, didn't hint at anything. He wanted the surprise to be pure, the kind where the door opens and laughter freezes for a second before turning into joy. Snow still clung to his boots as he stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, listening to the familiar sounds inside. Music playing softly, wrapping paper tearing, children laughing. For a brief moment, warmth spread through him. This was home. This was what he'd been fighting to return to. He turned the handle and stepped inside. The smell of pine and cinnamon filled the room, but something was immediately wrong. The living room was bright with Christmas lights, the tree glowing in the corner, gifts scattered across the floor. His kids were sitting cross-legged, eyes wide with excitement, holding new toys he didn't recognize. His wife sat on the couch, smiling, too relaxed, too comfortable. And beside her, close enough that their knees touched, was a man he had never seen before. The stranger was laughing with his children, helping his youngest tear open wrapping paper, his hand resting casually on the boy's shoulder. Time didn't just slow down, it fractured. The laughter kept going, the music kept playing, but inside his chest something dropped hard and hollow, like an elevator cable snapping. His brain refused to process the scene all at once. It tried to correct it, to explain it away. A cousin, a neighbor, a coworker stopping by for Christmas morning. But the way his wife looked at the man, familiar, unguarded, intimate, destroyed every innocent explanation before it could fully form. No one noticed him at first. He stood there, a ghost in his own house, watching his children smile at another man who was wearing slippers from his hallway and sitting in his spot. The shock wasn't loud, it didn't explode, it was silent and surgical, cutting through him with terrifying precision. His heart pounded, but his body felt cold, heavy, disconnected, as if it no longer belonged to him. Then his oldest looked up. Dad. The room collapsed into silence. His wife's face drained of color. The man froze mid-motion, still holding a toy box, eyes darting from the child to the uniform at the door. In that instant, every unspoken truth rushed into the open. No explanations were needed. No words could soften what had already been seen. He smiled for his kids because instinct took over where emotion failed. He knelt, hugged them, told them Merry Christmas in a voice that barely trembled. Inside, though, a storm was forming, confusion crashing into betrayal, love colliding with humiliation. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about replacement, about being erased while he was gone, about realizing that the life he thought he was protecting had continued without him, and someone else had stepped into the role he never imagined losing. That first moment wasn't anger. It was shock in its purest form, the kind that rewrites who you are before you even have time to react. Christmas had always been sacred to him, not in the grand church bell sense, but in the quiet rituals that defined family. It was the one day every year that survived distance, arguments, and exhaustion. Even during deployments, he made sure gifts arrived on time, letters tucked inside each box, reminders that he was still present even when his body couldn't be. Christmas was supposed to be the proof that nothing, not war, not time, not temptation, could break the bond of home. That belief shattered as he stood in his living room. The tree he and his wife had once chosen together still leaned slightly to the left, just like it always had. The same ornaments hung from its branches, the handmade ones from preschool, the chipped star his daughter insisted on placing every year, the wooden soldier he bought before his first deployment. All of it looked untouched, preserved like a memory, and yet the scene unfolding beneath it felt deeply wrong, like a sacred space had been quietly occupied by someone who didn't belong. The gifts his children were opening weren't from Santa. He knew that instantly. They were too expensive, too personalized, chosen by someone who had been watching them closely, learning their habits, their wants. Someone who had been there in the mornings and evenings, in the small moments that mattered. The realization burned slowly, far more painful than rage. This wasn't a mistake or a brief lapse. It was a life built in his absence. What hurt most wasn't just that his wife had betrayed him. It was that she had allowed the betrayal to step into their traditions, to sit beneath their tree, to smile during a moment meant to symbolize unity and love. Christmas wasn't just another day. It was the one time of year that carried the weight of promises. And she had let another man claim it without resistance. He watched his kids, blissfully unaware, thanking the stranger with genuine excitement. They weren't at fault, how could they be? They only knew who showed up, who wrapped gifts, who sat beside them when the lights came on. But that truth twisted something inside him. While he had been surviving on rationed sleep and memories, someone else had been building familiarity where he once stood. The house felt smaller now, crowded with unspoken guilt. His wife couldn't meet his eyes. Her silence was louder than any confession. In that silence lived every missed bedtime, every shared laugh, every decision she made to normalize the presence of another man in the most intimate parts of their family life. This wasn't betrayal born of loneliness alone. It was betrayal that crossed a line into desecration. She hadn't just cheated. She had rewritten the meaning of home while he was away. Christmas, the day that was supposed to remind them who they were to each other, had been turned into proof that vows could be bent, traditions replaced, and love quietly reassigned. Standing there, surrounded by lights and laughter that no longer felt his, he understood something painful and irreversible. Some betrayals hurt not because they are secret, but because they happen openly in places that were once sacred. The children were the hardest part of it all. Not the sight of another man in his home, not even the quiet collapse of trust between him and his wife, but the way his kids accepted the moment as normal. They sat on the floor in their pajamas, cheeks flushed with excitement, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and half-open boxes, completely unaware that the world they knew had just fractured. Their father, he watched them carefully, noticing things he had missed before, the ease with which they spoke to the man, the way his youngest leaned toward him without hesitation, holding up a toy for approval. The way his daughter laughed at something he said, a soft, comfortable laugh that came from familiarity, not politeness. These weren't the reactions of children meeting a stranger. These were the reactions of children who had been around him long enough to trust him. That realization struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Children didn't understand betrayal or loyalty. They understood presence, who made breakfast, who helped with homework, who showed up when they cried at night. While he had been gone, counting days and carrying their photos in his pocket like armor, someone else had filled those spaces. Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of opportunity, and that didn't make it hurt any less. He forced himself to keep smiling, to keep his voice steady as he asked them about their gifts. He praised their excitement, listened to their stories, nodded as if everything was exactly as it should be. Inside, though, guilt and grief tangled together. Guilt for leaving, even though it wasn't a choice. Grief for moments he could never reclaim, first laughs he didn't hear, first questions he didn't answer. Comfort that someone else provided in his place. The children didn't know they were standing at the center of an emotional battlefield. They didn't know that their joy was cutting him open. They were innocent, and that innocence made everything heavier. He couldn't be angry in front of them. He couldn't let his voice rise, couldn't let his face harden. Whatever happened next, they deserved protection, from shouting, from blame, from the truth, until it was unavoidable. And yet a quiet fear crept in. If they could accept another man so easily, what did that mean for him? Would he become a visitor in his own children's lives, a weekend presence, a name spoken with distance instead of warmth? The thought terrified him more than any confrontation waiting behind closed doors. He realized then that betrayal wasn't just between adults. Its ripples touched everything. It placed children in the middle of choices they never asked to make, loyalties they shouldn't have to understand. His wife had crossed a line not just as a partner, but as a mother, by allowing their children to bond with someone who might disappear just as suddenly as he had arrived. As he hugged them later, holding them a second longer than usual, he made a silent promise. No matter how shattered the marriage became, no matter how ugly the truth turned out to be, he would not let his children pay the price for adult mistakes. They were the only thing in that room still untouched by wrongdoing, and he intended to keep it that way, even if it meant carrying the pain alone. The rage started quietly, almost imperceptibly, as a low hum in the back of his mind. It didn't announce itself with shouts or physical tension at first. It grew in measured waves, a dark tide that pulled him under the surface even as he smiled for his children. He had learned discipline in the military, had trained his body and mind to react precisely under pressure, and now that discipline became both his shield and his cage. The anger was there, sharp and undeniable, but it couldn't spill out, not yet. Not in front of the kids, not in the middle of Christmas morning, not when he had to maintain the illusion of normalcy. His eyes never left the man. Every laugh, every casual gesture, every hand resting too close to his children ignited a spark that threatened to ignite into a wildfire. Yet he held it back, his jaw tight, hands curling into fists only when the stranger looked away. He catalogued every detail: the way the man's shirt was wrinkled from lounging on the couch, the scuffed sneakers he wore in his own living room, the casual familiarity that had no right to exist here. All of it fed the storm inside him. The internal conflict was maddening. Part of him wanted to explode, to let all the suppressed fury out in a single, devastating confrontation. Another part wanted to retreat, to analyze and plan, to wait until the moment when the emotional and physical upper hand could be fully secured. His military instincts screamed for control. His heart screamed for justice. And both voices demanded the same thing: that the betrayal not be allowed to stand unchallenged. Every small movement by his wife caused his pulse to spike. The way she averted his gaze, the faint tremor in her hands as she passed a gift, the way she lingered too long near the man, all of it reinforced the reality that she had chosen this life, even temporarily, over him. The silent rage was no longer just anger at the man. It was anger at her, at the circumstance, at the way life had conspired to put him in a position where he had to suppress what he truly felt. The injustice burned hotter than anything else. The idea that someone could infiltrate the very foundation of his family while he was away protecting them. He imagined scenarios, countless permutations of confrontation. Should he confront them now? Should he wait until the house was empty? Should he strike with words or actions first? The possibilities raced through his mind at lightning speed, each one measured, tactical, rooted in the survival instincts that had kept him alive in far more dangerous environments. Yet with every thought, the rage deepened, entwined with frustration and heartbreak, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. And through it all, he maintained a calm exterior, speaking gently to his children, offering reassurance, nodding, smiling. Inside, the storm raged a hurricane of betrayal, shock, and fury. Every second of this quiet control reinforced his awareness of his own strength and restraint. He knew that the silent rage wasn't weakness, it was preparation. And when the time came, when the situation demanded it, that anger would no longer be silent. It would be focused, precise, and unavoidable, a force that would correct the injustice that had invaded his home and his life. Even in the midst of shock, betrayal, and silent rage, a strange clarity began to form in his mind. The situation demanded more than emotional reaction. It demanded strategy. He wasn't just confronting a moment of infidelity. He was facing a life that had been quietly rewritten in his absence, a life where his place had been temporarily filled by someone else. This clarity shifted his thoughts from devastation to a plan, from passive anger to anticipation. There would be consequences. There had to be consequences, not for vengeance alone, but to reclaim the dignity of his family and assert the boundaries that had been so blatantly crossed. He considered the possibilities with a precision only military training could instill. Confronting them immediately carried risk. The stranger could react violently, the children could be further traumatized, and the situation could spiral out of control. Waiting, however, allowed observation. It allowed him to assess behavior, see patterns, gather evidence of the betrayal's depth, and prepare for a confrontation that was controlled, precise, and undeniable. The key was timing. Justice and emotion had to intersect at the perfect moment. Too early, and he might lose control. Too late, and the opportunity to assert authority could diminish. The plan had to be deliberate, the execution deliberate, almost surgical in its precision. In his mind, he envisioned confronting his wife first, not with uncontrolled rage, but with questions designed to uncover truths she had attempted to hide. What did this man mean to her? How long had this been happening? What boundaries had been crossed? And how far was she willing to let this go? The answers would guide his next steps. If she showed remorse, there could be room for negotiation, for rebuilding, perhaps even for salvaging some part of the family. If she did not, then the path forward would be irreversible, marked by legal actions, protective measures, and the careful restoration of his children's sense of security. The stranger's presence posed another challenge. He was an intruder in a role that should never have been available. Confronting him required not just authority, but psychological dominance, the ability to show that no amount of familiarity or manipulation could override the rightful claim of the father. Every action, every word, every movement had to communicate this truth without endangering the children or allowing room for rationalization. The stranger needed to understand viscerally that he had stepped into a space he had no right to occupy. Even amidst this tactical planning, there was a deep emotional undercurrent. Every decision carried the weight of his love for his children, the betrayal of trust by someone he had once shared life with, and the undeniable humiliation of seeing his family's sacred moments corrupted. This duality, cold, calculated strategy fused with intense personal emotion, defined the path forward. It wasn't just revenge. It was restoration, reclamation, and the reaffirmation of what was rightfully his. As the holiday unfolded around him, laughter and cheer continuing in the living room, he quietly made a vow. The betrayal would not stand unchallenged. The sanctity of his family would be restored. And when the time came, the consequences would be undeniable, leaving no room for doubt or excuse. The story was far from over, and the ending would reflect the balance of justice, strategy, and the quiet, unwavering love that had brought him home in the first place.